Did you hear that?
Yes.
All right, well, we're recording, we're live. The world is watching or able to watch, should they so choose. Hi, welcome, Dr. Faith. Welcome, everybody, to this conversation with Dr. Faith G. Harper. Dr. Faith, can you tell us, you have a lot of initials after your name. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Sure. So I think everyone knows PhD. I have people ask me like what your PhD actually is in, and it's counselor education and supervision, which is a research and teaching degree. So when people are like, how do you write so many books? I'm like, well, I was trained to teach these topics. So hopefully I could write, I should be able to write those books if that's what my PhD is. I have LPCS means that I'm a board supervisor in the state of Texas. So when you finish school, your first 3,000 hours being a clinician is you're under the supervision of somebody who's theoretically older and wiser and there to keep you out of trouble. And then I have a postdoc in sexology and a postdoc in clinical nutrition. And I have more, but those are kind of the relevant ones to what I write about. And otherwise, it would just get ridiculous, and we would just sing the alphabet song. And
So you're also an author, and so I'm, for viewers who aren't familiar, I'm Ellie. I'm with Microcosm Publishing, and we've been publishing Faith's books for about 5 years now. 6 years? 5 years.
Yeah.
It's our 5-year book anniversary this year. And so this started with her first book, Unfuck, Your Brain, which remains our best-selling book. Actually, it sells more every year, which is not normally how book sales work. And then she's also gone on and tackled unfucking various other issues in other books, such as depression, anxiety, adulting, boundaries, anger, and even money. And her next book, Unfuck Your Body, is funding on Kickstarter right now. So if you go to Kickstarter and you type in Unfuck Your Body, but you put in like a asterisk instead of the U or the second U in Unfuck, you'll find that there. That's going for another week. Can you tell us about Unfuck Your Body? It's a little bit different than, well, it's on the surface a little different from your other books in reality.
Right. Well, and it's not a diet and exercise book. And I remember when we talked about it, even when Brain came out, I'm like, okay, so I know what the follow-up is going to be. Unfuck your body. And you're like, no, like that. Please don't like tell us that we have to eat keto and do a yoga and gargle with lavender oil. I'm like, no. It's about the mind-body connection, because there's only, Unfuck Your Brain was really about what was happening in the limbic system with trauma. And there's so much more about that I get really geeky about. And there's only so much you can put in one book. And I'm like, this is the next part of that. And you said, okay, well, let's see how this one does. And it's done well enough that you're giving me a shot. But it really is like, it's Unfuck Your Brain Electric Boogaloo. It really is the second part of that book, because it's like, now that we understand the brain, let's figure out like how that messaging gets there. And so let's talk about the body. Like if I can make the limbic system understandable, I can make the vagal system understandable as well. And you helped me do that, because you said, like, you're making me cry. You're saying I don't get it. And so people feel really bad for Ellie and send her cookies, because she has to edit me when I think it's very comprehensible. And she's like, no, like take it down, like bright golden retriever, bring it back down. And then I wanted to tie in, there's so much about trauma and how emotional trauma affects the physical body and the toxins in the environment. And I had to have my little diatribe about the BMI being a tool of eugenics and just racist, transphobic trash. And so you let me get that in there. So even when I'm talking about things like food, it's coming from a place of, you need to figure out what works for you. This is probably some of the stuff you may be dealing with. If you have a lot of trauma, there's probably some inflammation. We're all dealing with toxic environment. I'm, the no diet nutritionist. So I'm like, if we're working on like the health behaviors, if you're finding, things that make your body feel good in terms of movement and food, then you will feel better. It's not a prescribed plan or anything like that. And my thing is, like, if you want one thing to do, reducing your ultra processed foods by 30% is extraordinary. And that's doable, I think, for most of us. Even people who have limited funds, a 30% reduction is fairly doable for a lot of people, and that can make a huge difference. You don't have to invest in, the organic baby carrots for the rest of your life if you can't afford that.
I totally went to the grocery store the day after I edited the first draft of that chapter, and I was about to get the canned tomatoes I normally get, and then I remembered what I had just read, and I got the no salt added ones instead.
Yes,
so, and
because
they were fine. They tasted
bad, but the added sodium is trash. Yeah, and
I didn't know that. I always thought salt was the problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, yes, and yeah, of course you edit it, so you heard my rant about sodium versus salt and what they've done in other countries and the difference that it's made. And so we usually think in terms of these extremes of you have to do this body pump and you have to do this hardcore Whole30. And I talk about sometimes a diet like keto can make a lot of sense for somebody, but it's not prescriptive for everybody. And we're all having to sort of figure out what our own sensitivities are and having to deal with our own lifestyles and our own budgets and things like that. But also putting it in perspective of, just because you're a size 16 or a 26 or a 46 doesn't mean you're automatically broken and unlovable and unfuckable and going to die in 6 months. That's trash science. And so I wanted to lead in with that. And I even said in that chapter, if this is emotionally expensive, even reading about food, skip it. But even if you want to hear really why the BMI really is trash science, this isn't me just trying to make you feel better, it really is crap, then at least read that section. So hopefully, I've had some people go, wait, what? I knew that BMI wasn't great, but it really wasn't full of eugenics?
Faith, can you hold on? Because Lydia tells me that we're not actually streaming.
Uh-oh.
I know, and I can't figure it out because it looks like we are. Oh, fuck. Help. Let me see. I might need to go in. It says we have an excellent connection and that we've been live for 7 minutes, but when you go to the YouTube, are we on the wrong thing?
Where are you streaming to? Yeah.
What is happening? Let's see. Let's see if I can go into edit. I wonder if I put the wrong credentials in or something.
See, this is why we needed an adult.
I know. I should have said, Lydia, just come help me. How do we make it live? I just don't know. Settings maybe? No. Go live. Maybe this will do it. No, it totally says that we're still live. Well, whoever's watching this later may end up capturing this.
Are you seeing comments on the stream?
Nobody's chatting.
Okay, no, I am seeing live event will begin in a few minutes. It is not showing.
Oh, apparently we're not at the link that we've been sharing. Oh, Jesus. Okay, well, I'll update that. Hey, everyone. Sorry for
right now it's saying 13 people are waiting right now very patiently for us.
I don't even know how to get into that link.
So the microcosm.pub/body convo, which goes to the YouTube. Do I need to send you that YouTube link or do you have it?
No, I have it. Can you make the real one live and send people to the real link? I'm just really amused by people watching this later and getting to hear us be kind of old. And we're not boomers, everyone. We're Gen X.
We're middle-aged. Yeah.
We are. We don't know how to technology. How do we technology?
It's actually my youngest's birthday today. So Sam is 21 today. So I had clients back to back starting super early. And since he's in California, I'm not an asshole, so I wasn't going to text him at 6 a.m. So I texted him when I got out. And since he's in California, he was already at the dispensary. getting his and sent me a picture of his legal dispensary goods and his booze and his candy.
All right, we are going to start over.
Okay.
How does that sound?
Sounds good.
I don't think we have to totally start over though, because I think the
We can
people
start
that
over.
have been waiting to see this are they know who you are. They can go back and watch. All right, anyone who's watching this now, you can go back and watch the first part of this video if you want to hear about all of Faith's degrees, which she has many of, and her expertise, and her book that we're currently funding on Kickstarter, Unfuck Your Body. And then you can also listen to us be like, oh no, the internet
Nothing's
is
working,
interneting.
and we're old.
How does this work? I just don't understand.
Are we working now?
I
think so. I'm looking at it on my phone, and it's still saying it is not live.
Really?
And there are 17 people waiting.
Yeah, I think we were sharing the wrong link, apparently.
This is going as good as my Reddit AMA.
It's at least for a lot. We're doing something. Something is. Okay, everyone. Faith, let's keep talking about technology and stress. I feel remarkably unstressed right now. I feel a little, let's talk about emotions. I feel a little chagrined. But I don't know. Ever since I read your chapter in Unfuck Your Body on stress, it's been a lot easier for me to not just fall into that pit of stress.
You commented on that pretty regularly through the process, like that mind blown on the stress research.
That was the thing that, I mean, and I know that like everybody like probably seizes on something else. Oh, people are watching us now, more people are watching us, which is really great. Welcome, people.
Hey.
We've been hanging out in this channel for a while. If you want to go back and listen to the beginning, you'll hear Faith talk about her expertise and her degrees. You'll hear us talk a lot about Unfuck Your Body, which is her upcoming book, which is funding on Kickstarter. And now you're going to hear us talk about unfucking the last chapter of the pandemic, which is, well, hopefully the last chapter of the pandemic.
We'll see. We've been pretty good at fucking that up, so
yeah, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah. I live in the state where people lick doorknobs because it's their constitutional right or whatever. So.
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, let's start with like just how are you doing?
Yeah, overwhelmed. I definitely have COVID fatigue. I don't know anybody who doesn't feel that way. I actually got there's been a lot of articles about how it's affecting the healthcare profession, but mental health professionals keep being left out of that conversation. So I'm like, I'm going to put together a survey on that because we need some kind of data about this of, doing trauma therapy while being traumatized and what that's the toll that's taking. And it's funny, like a lot of my former interns and stuff are talking about like, they're like, wow, like everything you said about boundaries, like is resonating with how important that is right now. And that self-care is not this cutesy thing, but it's the only thing that's going to get me through this is, thinking about in order to like bring my best self and be there for people, what I need to do for myself in that process has made it very, very apparent for the people that I work with. Everybody I know is full and has a waiting list and, is just packed. And I think that I'm having other people say that too, like they're having a hard time even finding a therapist right now because, and everybody's reaching out, which is great. But we're also having to, and my husband just walked through behind me. You can go check on the cats in the backyard, make sure that they're alive. Everybody watching, I'm outside because on top of everything else, we had that amazing freak snowstorm in Texas, which was handled so poorly. And we did get a burst pipe in that. So we have one room in our house is completely shut down. And my husband was running a recovery group out of the other room. So I'm outside with the cats who think this is great.
And how hot is it there?
It is, it was 93 when we logged in. We can see what it is right now. Oh, it's 91.
It's cooling down rapidly.
It's cooling down, yes.
All right, well, let's start with, we have a question from a reader about finding a therapist. So let's start with that one. They say that they moved during the pandemic, and so they need a new therapist.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are, like you say, in the boat of being like, I need to take care of my mental health. I will try therapy. Yeah. And yeah, how has the pandemic changed the way we try to find new therapist-client relationships, if at all? And are there any helpful hints to keep in mind when trying to find a therapist these days?
Well, probably so if you're trying to look for where is the phone book of therapists, the biggest one is usually Psychology Today. So I usually that's usually a pretty good starting point, and you can see decent information. I don't advertise at all anymore. Sorry, we also have birds. But I've had a lot of people find me because they Google search for, trauma therapist San Antonio, or, sex therapist or whatever. And so even trauma therapist by me, and you'll see kind of who shows up in your area as good starting points. A lot of my referrals come from other clients or other clinicians. And so ask people do you have a therapist that you like? But also it's okay if it takes a minute. If you meet someone and you're like, no, I don't think so. I think a lot of times people think they're failing at therapy versus that just wasn't the right relationship for you. There are plenty of people that, love my style, and there's plenty of people that are like, but I want you to be nice and cuddly. And I'm like, no, you're doing dumb shit right now. And therapy is not Rent-A-Friend. And, I can be empathic, but I'm also not going to let you off the hook. And they're like, but that's what I want. And that's okay. They can go find somebody who does that. So you have to find somebody who stylistically matches with you as well. So if you meet someone and you're like, oh, okay, no, not for me. And they're like, so should we book your next session? It's okay to yeah, let me think about that and get back to you. I always ask that as a counselor after first session is was this helpful for you? We talked about a lot of stuff. Do you want to, kind of marinate on this and get back to me? Or do you want to schedule something else? This needs to be what works for you. I give people an out. And some people work at places where they're trying to fill the books. So it's okay to go, let me think about everything we talked about and get back to you, and go. And I have to tell people I'm shopping a few therapists and I'll let you know. And I think that's perfect. I don't see anything wrong with that. And I tell people you just need to get better. You don't have to get better with me. So if you just prefer a dude, or you found somebody closer, or you found someone that takes your insurance, whatever, it's fine.
So speaking of meeting new people, we have another reader question. I really love the way this question is phrased. Strangers made me kind of nervous before the pandemic, and now being near strangers makes me feel anxious and unsafe. How can I help myself learn to feel safe around strangers or in crowds again?
I've never liked crowds either, even pre-pandemic. That doesn't, so I think you need to honor that your body, just your nervous system gets jangly in certain situations, and that's fine. I don't think that we have to sort of challenge ourselves all the time because that's better for us. There's certain situations where yep, we have to be here because I'm watching my brother graduate, and so I have to be in this auditorium or whatever. But I don't think you need to force yourself into situations that are not good for you. And you might do better in events where you have more physical space for your body. And even right now with COVID, it's still transmissible. Not everyone's been vaccinated. The vaccination is not necessarily going to keep you from having it, or, all those other things. Doing stuff that's more outside based will give you more space for your body. And if you're doing something if you're outside, then you're doing something if you, join a hiking group or whatever, then it also is easier to be focusing on what you're doing versus hi, awkward new person, I'm here to make friends. Would you like to be my friend? And, and it kind of takes away some of that other stuff because you have you have shit that you're doing, and then you are, so it's time well spent. So even if you don't meet your magical bestie, you feel good about the time that you spent. I saw that there's there's a couple, but there's like a women's hiking group that has gotten like really active in San Antonio because of that. And then there's a subset group for plus size women of just like, hey, like we want to be able to like just really feel comfortable in our bodies, and all you tiny bitches go away. And like I love that they've created that space for themselves too, where if there's other things about being out that make you feel awkward, there's ways of feeling safer in spaces.
So to follow up on that question, we actually got 3 questions that were very similar. So I'm going to kind of paraphrase it and smush it all into one question. But basically, like how, a lot of us more introverted types found that we actually really have thrived having less social contact during the pandemic. So how do we kind of continue that and keep saying no to events, to crowds, to even to like just having coffee and catching up all the time, without injuring those relationships with friends who are like maybe more eager to get back to normal?
Yes, those extroverts that feed off of that. I had a client say this week, and I love that. She said, I really realized that like the amount of that kind of stuff that I can do in a week is like 2 things. And so she's in that COVID gave her permission to realize it about herself. And I think that's phenomenally healthy. And so she's been setting that boundary of, I'd like to do that, but I'm already super booked for the week. So if you don't mind like looking a few weeks out, I would like to do that. But so she's keeping it like 2 events a week is her doable amount with all the other stuff that she does. And so she's not saying no to everything, but she's keeping a boundary about what's a doable amount of time. And I would say like, even if you're like, okay, well, I can't really go to that, blame your doctor. Like, well, I'm higher risk, I've had some inflammation and my doctor really wants me to be careful of these other spaces. So I'm still going to skip out on stuff. Fucking lie. It's fine. It's, it's a white lie. But I like how she's doing it. She's not saying no to stuff. She is really like booking her events out, knowing what her limit is. And I think anybody who loves you can respect that. I would hope so. And they can be like, oh, well, shit, I miss you. Like, I miss you too. But I want to like enjoy my time when we're there and not be stressed out and itchy and trying to escape.
And yeah. And this is kind of like the mirror image of that question, but we have like, and I mean, I know that like the extroverts I know suffered kind of the most in the pandemic from the isolation aspect of it. But we have one very poignant question where this reader got a night job just before the pandemic hit and was alone with a few friends for most of their life before that. So like very feeling kind of alone to begin with. And then, went from being not very social to just being like, how do I even try? The isolation and loneliness are compounded, and they just feel like this cog in a machine. Like, how can people get out there in society again when maybe they've kind of forgotten how?
Oh, and the biggest point of that is we're all a little feral right now. So I think we're cutting each other more slack. I do have a lot of teen clients, and I had one tell me today that she's been out of school for some time because of how bad her anxiety was. And actually COVID gave us a chance to do some more intense work on that. And she's like, everybody's going to be going back to school and everyone's like really awkward about it. And we're all like, feral and anxious. And so I'm just going to like fit right in. So I love that perspective. Like that felt like the perfect time to jump back in, because it was like, Portland is not as much of a driving town as San Antonio is. Everything shut down for 2 months, and like how bad the driving was when people started driving again. It was like, yeah, some of y'all have not turned on your car in 2 months, and it shows. And I think we're going to be doing that socially as well. And I think that we're going to be giving each other a lot more grace in that process. And I think we need to give ourselves a lot more grace in that process. And it's okay to just own that. I tend to just like own my awkwardness with humor. And I would just say like, okay, well, so like I'm super feral because I haven't been anywhere in a year. So like, how about them Cowboys? And make a joke about it. Like I'm like, I will seduce you with my awkwardness. Give me a chance. We are going to a masked and distance event on Saturday, but also giving ourselves permission to like leave as soon as we need to. Like, and that's, I want to do this. I want to support this event. But I will keep my mask on, and I have a limited amount of tolerance for wearing one before my own anxiety kicks in. And so my husband's like, well, let's go. Like, and if we need to fuck off, we'll fuck off. That's fine. And, you know, we'll tell her, like, my nose is running under my mask, the oak pollen. I'm sorry, I gotta leave. And so we have to give ourselves a chance to do things imperfectly. Like, I don't have to be like on, I can go and do the best that I can. And Ellie, as you well know, like I had to build up even mask tolerance, like practicing going to the little corner store in the mask before I could like go shop for my groceries in a mask. And so there's a lot of awkwardness about being in public for me. So I can relate to that very strongly.
Yeah, we've commiserated about this. I actually had to do EFT in order to be able to wear a mask for more than 2 seconds without completely losing my shit. And I learned that from your zine, so thank you for that. That really made the difference between being completely isolated and actually being functional in the world.
And I've noticed that if you cry in the bathroom at Target, people just let you. So if you ever...
That's good advice.
Like, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to fight about the mask. I know that I actually can breathe. It's just my brain. Like, I'm having a trauma reaction to this mask. This is not reality, you know, and so my response to being uncomfortable, my body is brilliant at getting me out of situations. It makes my nose run. So my body be like, haha, snot's running down your face, so you have to leave. So I spent months of my nose running under my mask before I sort of had that prolonged exposure and built up being able to wear it. And so now it's uncomfortable, but my nose doesn't run.
That's great to hear, though. I'm sad for the Kleenex Corporation's general profits. That's kind of along those lines. When we were talking 13 months ago, we sat on my sofa together in Portland, perhaps unwisely, and talked about, it was like the very first week that really kind of everything was getting serious about the pandemic, and you happened to be in Portland for an event that ended up being canceled.
We did the last in-person event at Pals, and then everything else canceled. And then they're like, and you're stuck, you're not going home. And you're like, okay, well, if you need to do therapy in our back room with your people in Texas, we'll do that.
I'm glad you made it home. Your cats would have been really sad without you. But anyway, we were sitting on my sofa and your husband was holding the phone up when we did a Facebook live stream. And one of the things we talked about was like, you know, navigating kind of the differences between friends and family members who are taking the pandemic super seriously and people who are like kind of neutral, and then people who are like super anti any kind of public safety measure. And I feel like that question just hasn't even changed. Like, how do you deal with that? Like, now it's like, how do you deal with the friend who's like sending you the anti-vaccine videos and being like, you should really check this out? And like, yeah, how do you deal?
Well, and again, I'm in Texas, so we're getting it from our governor.
Oh,
who is older and uses a wheelchair for mobility. And I'm like, you think that he would be like pro safety, but no. I honestly think, and sometimes it's hard for me to remember this, and I'll tell another story on myself. I honestly think people are doing the best they can. Like, I have to go into it presuming that people are doing the best that they can. Otherwise, I would just like have to give up on my profession. And I don't agree with what, some people's best is. But then that means that it has to be my boundary. If somebody says, I don't think masks are necessary, and like, whatever they've read or said about that, like, and I can even understand, like, there's been varying information and we get information flooded and overwhelmed. And especially if you don't like masks to be, and I'm like, well, I'm going to err on the side of like caring about other people. I'm going to err on the side of doing the best I can. And even though this isn't comfortable for me, I can do this. And so if somebody else doesn't want to, then my boundary has to be to choose not to be around them. And I do get pissed. My husband, like, I was like, these people dick nosing their masks and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, you're getting really upset and this isn't good for you. And I'm like, it's very easy to solve. I would not be upset if they wear their fucking mask. He's like, yes, I understand that, but like that's not the point. I've gotten really good being middle-aged of, you know, giving people stink eye and they fix masks. So I've perfected the stink eye. But I if I go into a place and it does like it feels too crowded and people like aren't being mindful and kind and considerate, I just leave. And so we've done a lot of that. We'll walk in and we're like, oh, and no. But I'm like and so I'm not getting angry. I have my own boundaries about where I will be and where I will go. And recognizing like I may not agree with somebody else's choices, but I don't think most people are like, haha. I mean, there have been a few, but I think generally speaking, most people are like, haha, fuck you. I hope I have COVID and I give it to you. I think most people are, and I know people are struggling with vaccine questions. I've been doing a lot of research on the vaccines and trying to figure out like which one's the safest and how to make good decisions about them. And I think there is this wide spectrum in the middle of not being anti-vax, but also wanting as much information as possible. And I think we need to, if we gave people that space of like, I've had a couple concerns too. That's not one of the concerns that I've had, but I appreciate that you're doing research. This is what I found when I was reading is a different that's kind of one of those Sarah Schulman's conflict is not abuse conversations. Because I've had people come into my office and be like, oh my God, this. I'm like, oh, yeah, I haven't seen anything about that. I have watched that and I have like, you know, I've seen that. And so, I think this is fine, but this will be one thing to watch for. But I think that what you read there, I don't think that from everything that I've seen, I don't think that's a real issue. That seems a little QAnon-ish to me. And so as somebody who's read a lot on it and like wanted to understand mRNA and how they're creating it and like really geeked out on that, like I respect people trying to wrap their heads around it. And I think when, you know, crazy uncle says like they're implanting a microchip in you, you're like, wow, okay. Like, and you can choose to, you know, engage in saying, well, these were my worries about it. And, you know, this is what I found out. And, you know, he may be crazy and he may be QAnon and he may think they're planting a microchip. And then you just be like, okay, well, agree to disagree. And we won't be hanging out.
Do you feel comfortable sharing the results of your research about the various merits of the different vaccines? Like which one are you going to get?
Yeah, so I mean, and some of it is like, and I've been watching the data. I am the person that is looking at this, you know, the CDC is tracking people's ab reactions. Again, like one of the things I tell clients is, so the Pfizer and the Moderna does cause some lymph node engagement and swelling. And so a lot of doctors are saying it may not, like getting a mammogram for like a couple months, not like years, but for a couple months, you may actually get a mammogram false positive because your lymph nodes are swelling. So that is something to like talk to your doctor about, of either waiting a little bit or just, you know, being aware that the lymph swelling could be caused by the vaccine. Like that's an example of like a pretty real and common side effect to be aware of. One of the biggest issues in Indian country has been that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is not as effective for Indigenous people. And of course, that's the vaccine that is going out to the reservations. So that was the one that I was kind of the most interested in because it wasn't causing that same lymph node flare. So I'm like, oh, like that might actually be the better choice. I'm like, oh, psych, I'm Choctaw. I guess I'm not taking that one. So of just like, hey, we kind of need some more data on how this is affecting Indigenous people. And an MD, Master's in Public Health doctor in Indian country was like, we should probably pass on this one until we have more data. And that's not me negging Johnson & Johnson. That's, you know, but just kind of watching how, okay, so knowing that my DNA is a little bit different and I might not get as much benefit from that one, that would not be the best choice, even though it's a one shot and you're done and, you know, all those other things. So calling all the Choctaw family members, like, don't get the Johnson & Johnson, or at least wait for a little bit more data. And I have a lot of privilege. Like I have a lot of control over my environment, so I could wait. Like if I was an anesthesiologist or something, I'd be like, give me whatever you have, like just pour it directly down my throat. It's fine. I'll deal with whatever side effects. But my husband works from home completely. I'm in office, but have huge control over my schedule and spacing and all those other things. So I didn't I didn't have to rush to vaccinate. In fact, even though I'm a medical professional, they said, okay, yes, you are, but if you're a private practitioner, please don't act like you're 1A. Like, can we get other people vaccinated first? And I know some private practitioners that didn't, but of me, like, trying to be a good citizen, saying like, hey, that works out well for me. There's people out there that have like direct contact who really need to get the vaccine right now. And the rollout in Texas has been terrible. And I can wait. And that also gave me a chance to kind of watch the data. And so I could go, okay, maybe I need to not get this one, and this one might work better for me, kind of thing.
So going back to the theme of family conflict, we have a reader who, I'm going to compress their story into a short thing, but basically it's been, a year not seeing their parents, and in that year they've realized they maybe need to set some different boundaries than the ones that have been going on for their entire lives. And trying to bring this up over the phone and email has not gone well, but now they're going to visit. Do you have any advice for them?
I hope that you have a therapist that you're working with, because it sounds like you're probably going to have to get really granular with your boundaries, since having the conversations nicely isn't working. Boundaries is a continuous conversation in my office. It probably came up with at least 3 clients just today. The only all we can do is set them. Like, we can decide what our own are around people. We can't make other people behave. Like, I can't wear their mask right, but I can leave a place where they're not. And so you're going to have to decide what you're willing to accept and not accept, and hold that boundary with love. And like, I'm open, I want to have a relationship with you, but with these circumstances. And so whatever you do, like, so you may go above and beyond for a family member, but you're not like, you're doing it. It's not begrudging. You're doing it like, I don't mind doing this. I'm choosing to do this. I'm doing this with love. This is a decision that I'm making. I'm not being manipulated into it. And that makes the other boundaries when you do say no easier. So think about what is, what are the hills you want to die on, and in which ones you're just like, oh, okay. So I'm not going to have an argument about that TV show, but we're going to definitely have a conversation with about the flag in the yard, or whatever it is. And, my thing with families is set the boundary, but be open to relational repair as much as possible. And again, people don't need to, but I always feel better about setting a boundary with somebody. Like, I want to have a relationship with you, but I need this boundary respected, but I'm here whenever you're ready to have that conversation. Makes me feel like less of an asshole when I do have to be firmer with somebody.
That's a great script. Thank you.
Yeah.
Here's another difficult boundary conversation. We have someone whose boss wants them to come back and work in the office, and they're not ready yet, but they're also like, I liked working from home. I would like to keep working from home. There's nothing about my job that cannot be done from home, and I have been a very high performer from home. Can you advise on that conversation?
Well, it sounds like it's not even a matter of short term, because if it was short term, we'll just get a doctor's note that you need to stay home.
Right.
Pretty much, like, everybody that I'm working with, like, we'll write whatever you need is fine. Like, whatever you need to do to be okay, I'll write for you. Like, what are your accommodations? If it's longer term, then I would go in ready to show what your productivity has been. Say it turns out that I actually, and again, you could also say, I have maybe some sensory processing issues. So I'm actually been more productive at home, but being able to back that up. Anytime I was advocating for staff members when, I worked at places and I'm like, hey, I want this money for this person or this project for this person, is I would go in with the numbers to back it up, because I would always have to bring it to the VP. And say like, okay, but this is what we have. Like, I'm not just saying, oh, I think this would be really nice. So if you can show that your productivity has been fine and you've been engaged, I don't see why they, or like, did you want us to go in, like, that fucking team building shit? Like, oh my God. Like, do I need to go in for the fucking team building shit once a month, but I can work from home otherwise? Can I work from home? I work from home 2 days a week, and I go to my office 3, and that's been like good for my schedule. Like, and maybe you can even compromise. But if you can demonstrate that your productivity has been fine, and you can show that on paper, a decent boss is going to listen, and maybe a better boss somewhere else will listen.
So, speaking of friends and family, it's been a very drinky year. Lots of people relapsing, lots of people increasing their intake of alcohol and drugs, lots of coping, self-medicating. How do you navigate kind of coming out of that? Like, not just as yourself, but also as like the friend of someone who maybe you haven't seen for a while and now they've changed a lot.
I mean, it depends on the level of friendship. I have people, you probably have a few friends that if you notice something, you could have that hard conversation. And other people, maybe not, or maybe not ready to hear it, which is true of addictive behaviors. You know, people don't quit until they're ready. But, you know, if you have like the person like, I love you and I want to have this tough love conversation, this has been a hell of a year, and you've kind of gone down the rabbit hole. And I've had clients come to me saying, okay, this isn't for me, my family members, whatever. And I'm like, well, here's a bunch of resources. So you can say, hey, this is recovery coaching. It's not 12-step based and it's free in the state of Texas. That's one thing we do well. Or there's this, or there's this therapist who specializes in that. And sometimes the overwhelm is like, where do I even start to get my shit together? And sometimes that can be a really good start. If you have that level of friendship, or if they bring it up to you. I have a lot of people who contact me, and my question is, do they know that you're calling me for them? And they're like, yes. Because sometimes they're like, oh, no, I didn't tell them. I was just going to trick them into going to therapy. I'm like, no, we don't do that. But sometimes it's, yes, they're feeling really overwhelmed, and I'm kind of helping them with this first steps, but they're super excited to see you. But I'm trying to kind of make it a little easier for them. So I'm setting the appointment, and I'm going to drive them to their first one, but they know. And like, I think that's amazing. When you're in that hole, when you're so depressed you can't even shower, you're definitely not going to do the research on therapy for yourself. So, you know, being able to offer that, like, you have to do the work, you have to go in and do the work. But if I, help you with finding the resources, would that be a good thing right now? And some people are like really, really relieved to get a little support.
Oh, so kind of on a similar note, a lot of us have become really even more internet users and social media users in the last year than we ever were before. And we have a question from someone who's on this live stream right now about what happens to the brain when you're kind of constantly looking at social media and notifications. Can you get a little brain science-y on us also?
Yeah, well, I mean, so the social media has created a level of connection, but it depends on how we use it. So we can tell people on this media that you are making me write a book about friendship and making friends. So I'm like really deep into that research right now about friendship and loneliness, and like, what is social media doing to us in that regard? And it's about the how we're using it that's the issue. Like, social media isn't inherently bad. Like, neither is cake, neither is alcohol. It's not inherently bad, but if it becomes that mindless or doom scrolling, or we're dropping thirst trap pics and for likes, that's not real connection and attention. And that's putting out this false self, and that doesn't really do anything for loneliness. But when we're using it to make connections and actually build relationships, and like, I'm going to join the local hiking group and then go on a hike with them, then it's a perfect use of that kind of media. So it's a matter of how we're using it. So even since like nothing was live for my clients that were really isolated, I'm like, well, let's find a group. Like, I realize everything right now is online, but let's find one that does meet, is local, and does meet in person when we can meet again. So you'll start having some connections, and you'll kind of know people. And then when we're meeting in person again, then you'll feel more comfortable like segueing into IRL life. And so starting with that and finding stuff that maybe is like, more outside. One of my friends who's a yoga teacher is doing like yoga on the patio now. Like, let's not be in an enclosed space, but people just desperately missing the energy of the group and, meeting outside and that kind of stuff. So I think it's like the how am I using it is the big issue.
now we're going to have kind of a heavier question. A lot of us have experienced a lot of grief in the last year. We've lost a lot of people. Oh my God. And you have a zine about grief, which was written well before COVID and does not take into account really the kind of like multiple griefs that we're having pile up on top of us. And can you like give us a little addendum to that kind of advice for people who
so I haven't lost anyone super, super close to me. Did lose a couple friends to COVID. Relatively, I guess, unscathed versus a lot of people. Like, and I'm not diminishing my experience, but I know there are people that lost every member of their family. And that's like just horrific to even try and wrap our heads around. And there is a lot of anger for me about how it was handled, and it didn't have to be. We didn't have to lose people as much as bad as it was, and as much as it was. So I think part of our grief process is honoring and working through that. And I was talking to a client about that who lost a family member, that it's a complicated grief because, like, fuck this country. I shouldn't have lost this family member. If we had done better, maybe I wouldn't. So it's not even like it's already hard enough to lose somebody, a family member, to cancer or something else. But when you have these other layers to a badly handled pandemic, that is another layer that we have to honor and work through. And one thing that I've been talking about a lot is because people ask me, like, well, how is this affecting us? And I'm like, well, first of all, like, I'm living through it too. So I'm right here with it too. So part of me is like, I don't know, it sucks. But also there are going to be things about this that we're not aware of for a very long time. And I think that we need to honor, like, we are, this is fresh. We're kind of starting to peek out maybe a little bit into the daylight. We're doing work on the losses that we have had, and just the collective grief of it was the third leading cause of death in 2020 in the US was COVID. And having to, even if maybe we didn't know anybody, but just how horrendous that is. And that's something that we may have not lost anyone in 9/11, but that's something that still sort of sits with people. But there's going to be things that we may not notice until next year or even 20, 30 years from now, and be prepared for that. You and I are old enough that we remember the AIDS pandemic. A lot of the people watching have, maybe some are too young. But one of the things that has come out of that we've only noticed recently is because we don't really have the queer elders that we should have now, because we lost so much of the LGBT community, specifically people of color, in the AIDS pandemic. So it's interesting now, people are complaining about conservative boomers. And of course, not everybody who's older is conservative. And we do have, there are queer elders, but we've lost millions of people, that, like, the artists and the creators and the people that, that we lost in the AIDS pandemic, that we're kind of realizing now that we don't have them in a way that's hitting hard 30 years later. And so it's hard to answer that question, because I think we're going to have some of the similar experiences around COVID as well, because it hit communities of color so hard. One of the other graphics I was just looking at today it wasn't in terms of deaths per number of people. It was highest in Indigenous populations. And so I know that the former First Lady of the Choctaw Nation in Mississippi was one of the people who died of COVID. And she was like this phenomenal person who did so much for the community. And so, of course, everybody sent me that. And just recognizing that the loss of our elders of color, and that we're going to notice it now, but we're going to continue to notice it. We're going to continue to notice their absence and grieve their absence. And we're going to notice, like, if we had these queer elders of color that weren't killed in the AIDS pandemic, then we would have a different voting bloc now, and we'd have, different people. We'd have people out there, being the aunties and uncles to, the younger generations in a way that we don't have and that we need. And we're going to notice that again, I think. I know it sounds like really being a downer, but I think this grief process is going to be very long term because it was so big.
I appreciate you bringing that out to the longest possible, the biggest possible consequence, which is huge and tremendous. And it makes me wonder, like, what can we do now, not just to cope with our immediate losses, but to sort of like prepare ourselves for a future that maybe is skewing even more towards the demographics that are been more protected during this pandemic. You wrote a whole book about anger, so maybe that's
well,
the one to draw on.
I think that, I mean, so much of we're doing now is doing more ground up organizing of recognizing that we're going to have to do this for ourselves, and that we may not have those we may not have, or as many of them as that we should or we need, and we're having to take on more of those roles. But we've seen so many like millennial and Gen Z communities taking that on, and we're going to have to be extra aware of that, and that we aren't voiceless, but we may need to take on. We don't have the aunties maybe to do the organizing for us that we should have and deserve to have, and so we may have to take on more of that ground up in the community.
So
and finding the liberal elders who have hung on, and progressives, the progressive ways that are there for us and want to get involved, and and valuing their voice as well. And I say that as one of them, as official middle-aged lady.
Well, thanks for being here and sharing your wisdom with us. What would you say? I'm thinking a lot about your book, Unfuck Your Body, which we're funding on Kickstarter right now, by the way, if anyone's not aware of that. It's a really good book. We sent it to print, but we went through a lot of rounds of edits. And one of the things I was kind of thinking about with that is like a lot of the strategies that you talk about aren't so much like, here's how you treat a specific medical issue, but more like, how do you like kind of make your body stronger and healthier so that you can withstand like whatever pandemic or disaster or snowstorm or smoke apocalypse or whatever comes next. And can you give us
however the government's trying to kill us this week?
What are like your top 3 to 5 tips for people for things that they could do right now to like help them continue to be healthy and become those queer elders of color that we're going to need?
Yes, I want to be in my rocking chair watching like Gen Z be the middle-aged badasses. So one of the things I talk about a lot in the book, probably to the point where you're like, girl, you're killing me with this, is inflammation. And, I have a friend who teases me. He's like, you think everything's inflammation, fucking clinical nutritionist and your inflammation. But I pretty much, like, anytime I have like a headache or anything, I also take like turmeric or some kind of anti-inflammatory. Like, I'm presuming that I do presume that inflammation is always present, because it probably is. So even putting aside toxic environment and, the things that I put in that book that horrified you about Inuit women and breast milk, and all the things that we don't have control over. The one thing that always kind of blows people's minds when I tell them is that emotional trauma, and even just the emotional toll of what we've gone through in the past year, our body doesn't differentiate where trauma comes from. It treats all trauma with this protective measure of inflammation. Inflammation is the body's way of healing trauma. So if we get in a car accident, and Ellie's like, and this is why we ride a bike, and we hit the steering wheel, it hurts our chest. We get contusions, and our body responds with inflammation for the healing. The body does the same thing with emotional trauma. The body doesn't differentiate. A hit is a hit. And so recognizing that I just kind of presume that everyone's inflamed and always suggest, adding more anti-inflammatories. I'm like that obnoxious lady that's handing out turmeric at parties. So much fun. So I think that recognizing that physical toll that it's taking, and I think that it doesn't hurt to drink some more green tea, and adding more anti-inflammatories may be of huge benefit for that physicality component. And we know that from the ACE studies, the adverse childhood events studies, and so when they were studying that, and that was Kaiser Permanente was studying, and they were even looking at very specific traumas, not even the broad spectrum of all these things that can be traumatic. And the more that children had gone through not only the more mental health issues they have, the more physical health issues that they had. And early on there, they were saying like, oh, well, yeah, but like if you're traumatized, then you just make really bad choices. And apparently like you just inhale Kentucky Fried Chicken and smoke 3 packs a day. And so it was basically, and so it's still all on you, but we know it's because of the trauma. And now we're realizing, no, first of all, fucking stop shaming people, but it's not the food choices. It is the trauma itself caused inflammation, and that's what's causing the heart disease. And then they also were living in poverty, so KFC is all they could afford. You fuck. So, there's a lot of stuff there, but knowing that inflammation is that common thread, and inflammation is not just about physical trauma.
Do you, let's see, we still have a few good questions. It's 5 to 6 here. We were going to end it at 1 hour. Do you mind going a little bit over because we got a later start?
We started late. Well, we had a great conversation, just everybody else wasn't a part of it.
If anyone wants to hear the story of the time we tried to have a Reddit AMA with Dr. Faith, that makes this seem like a walk in the park. We're really good at technology, though. We're really great at what we do.
So good. Right. So good. We're so good at being middle-aged. Like, just give me my clothes and my Lisa Loeb CD and leave me alone. Okay.
So something we haven't really talked about a lot yet in this last hour is kids. We have a question from a reader who says, one of my nephews has gone very quiet in the last year, and he didn't used to be. And how can we help kids move into this next phase where like we're opening up and maybe they're going back to school or not and have to kind of find a new way of being?
Yeah. Well, and I would honor that is, kids need grace too. And just saying, I've noticed that you've been quiet. I bet this was a tough year on you. What do you need and what would be helpful? And I mean, I work with a lot of teens, and they fucking tell me, like, they tell me exactly what they need, and they know where the communication breakdown is with their parents. And maybe I'm just really lucky to work with people that are incredibly articulate and self-aware, and like they're the ones that show up at my office. But generally speaking, most kids are pretty good at that. And if they're like, oh, I don't know, just like, okay, well, it's okay if you don't know. Like, I don't know either. That's why I was asking. If you think of something that would be helpful, like this was, and just some kids, like, this was tough. Like, this was a pretty fucked up year. A lot of teens that I worked with really, like, because they were stuck home, saw the dynamics in their families and saw the struggles of their parents and different, and became hyper aware and taking ownership of all that for themselves. And so there may be other stuff there that they kind of got to get away from and be a little bit more unaware of, and took that on because they could hear every conversation that was happening and could feel the tension in the room. So like, it's okay that you're quiet. You're allowed to be quiet. But if you miss enjoying this stuff, let's figure out ways that you can enjoy stuff again. Oh, thank you. I just got a new drink brought to me. This has been, you talked about alcohol and drugs being an issue in pandemic, and I've been back on the sauce diet Dr. Pepper, which my kidneys really don't like, but my mouth does. Yeah.
You got to have the delicious things as well as the healthy things, or there's no balance in the universe.
Yes.
All right, we have a question from someone who's listening right now. This is a really great question. Do you have any advice for setting boundaries around trauma comparing post-pandemic? I'm thinking especially of people saying, well, I had it worse than you because ... And,
and honestly, I'd be like, okay, yeah, okay, you did. My thing on that is because we do that to ourselves too. Well, I didn't have it as bad as other people. And that may be true. And I think that there's space for both, of saying that I can say, like, I had a lot of privilege. I have money in the bank. I had control over my schedule. I have privilege on like not having to freak out and being able to even like wait for a vaccine, and all those things. But that there was also things about this that were really hard. And I did lose 2 friends, and, and I have been through this. So I think both things are true. And when it becomes, trauma, trauma Olympics, then so when I have clients tell me that, I'm like, okay, so let's go ahead and follow that train of thought. If we follow that, then it becomes like the ultimate showdown until we get to like the one person on the planet who's like cooking over a dung fire in Borneo, and they have it worse than everybody else, and so nobody else is allowed to say anything. And then they laugh, and I'm like, right, so we can't, it's not trauma Olympics. And if somebody, and sometimes people are, when they start sharing their story, especially for people that are neurodiverse, that's their way of building empathy and wanting to connect. And it's not even like one-upsmanship. So even giving people the benefit of the doubt is they're trying, like, that's their way of trying to hear me, of saying, like, I've been through some shit too. But, you know, my tendency when people are like, oh, but I have this, that, and the other, I'm like, wow, that is a lot. Yeah, you've been through it. And just, you know, empathic, but not giving a lot of space for it, and just, okay, so this is not a person that I talk to about this. This is not the person that can have space for me right
now. Lots of people have been putting big life decisions on hold for the last year. How and when do you start moving on again?
I guess it would depend on the decision. And I know, you know, some people, you know, really like needed to, because they're like, I don't know what's going to happen with my job right now or whatever. But I've had a lot of, you know, clients that I've worked with in that situation talking about, you know, it's like there's a balancing act of like, do I do this right now? Should I wait? Of like, okay, so, you know, what's going to cost you more pain in the short term? What's going to cost you more pain in long term if you're having to make, you know, a complicated decision? But also to remind people, you have 100% survival rate thus far, so you're pretty good at this. So, you know, we can figure this out. If this is something that's valuable to you, do it. You know, I can be like, well, maybe I'm going to put off school. I'm like, well, you've got your momentum going. Do you really want to lose everything that you've done? Like, you can do that if you need to, but it sounds like, and they're like, actually, I really don't want to, you know. So talking, you know, somebody who can like kindly Socratic question you on that of like, you know, do you think that you should, or is this like, I need a break from this, I can't take this on right now? There's been plenty of things that I'm just like, yeah, that's too much, I can't do that. But the process for me now was like, well, I shouldn't or whatever. It's like I'm at my limit of things that I can take on, and I'd rather do certain things very well than do a bunch of things half-assedly or shittily.
So for folks listening, I've got a couple more questions saved up for Faith, but if you have any other questions that you would like to ask her in the next few minutes, then please type them into the chat on YouTube, and I'll see if I can get them to her. Here's a kind of a segue question from that last one, which is like, we live in a pretty uncertain time, or at least it feels like it. It may or may not objectively be more or less uncertain, but just the last year, it just seems like every month there's been like a new big thing that kind of eats up all of our attention and requires maybe some major changes in how we think and act and be in the world. Do you have any tips for like, you know, living day to day, but also making plans for the future when you're constantly expecting the next disaster or social upheaval, or maybe even a good, amazing thing to happen?
Well, and I think too that I have to do that, because what if I can't be hopeful, then what's the point, I guess? Is that it can be like, well, fuck it then. Like, we're just all fucked, so hookers and blow it is. But I would rather be hopeful about the world and putting work into that. You know, living a good life, you know, of loving what I do and loving other people and putting good things out there and being hopeful about being able to resolve these issues. And if I'm coming from that framework of, you know, giving a shit, then I feel like, well, okay, I'm doing the best that I can with what I have. And so if we have a freak snowstorm, then I will deal with that too. And the conversation we had as we were cleaning up water in the middle of the snowstorm is, I told my husband, and he's like, we are so good in a crisis. And I would love a chance to not have to continue to prove that.
Right.
I'd like to have a crisis break. I appreciate that I'm good in a crisis. I would like to not have to prove it right now. that was our humor moment in that situation. Again, being outside because I don't have access to my entire house right now because of we still don't have repairs. But I otherwise I just have to fucking kill myself, I guess. Like I wouldn't see what the point would be if I wasn't hopeful about the world. And so that's what I have to my decision-making process has to be about being hopeful for the world. And so that's like when I'm feeling like, well, fuck me is what it feels like. I'm like, okay, it like, and giving myself compassion. It's okay that I feel that way, but that's not going to really get you anywhere. So be grumpy for a minute, have a cookie, and then decide what would be the course of action that, is hopeful about the world. And that's the framework that I use, which is kind of not completely Pollyanna-ish, like maybe like a little dark Pollyanna, I don't know, but not trying to blow smoke up my own ass and pretending things are fine. But if I'm hopeful, then I'm going to act in that direction.
We have another question from a person watching this now who says, I heard you talk about the superhero pose and how that increases testosterone and confidence. Lots of yoga poses are said to also calm the nervous system. Is there evidence of that in the brain, and are there any specific ones that you recommend if we're feeling a little head up right now?
So I do have a little yoga sequence in the Anger book. In the Anger book, right?
Yeah.
So what yoga is doing, like, I'm so excited. I get to geek out right now. So, our fascia, which is what's packed between like the tissue and the muscle, like that's that really tight network of stuff. And I live in Texas. So when I teach this class, somebody goes, oh, you mean the gristle? And I'm like, yes, it's the gristle. The fascia is comprised of collagen. It's piezoelectric. So when we're doing mindful type movement, we're actually activating electrical charges in our body. So that's what like yoga and qigong and tai chi are doing. And I wrote about this in the body book, and you let me. I'm like, but this is so interesting. And so it's going to be about what feels good for your body. Like, don't do shit that hurts, please, for the love of God, don't do shit that hurts. Sometimes people have found that, and some people like cringe up because I love hip openers. Some people hate them, but sometimes doing work around the psoas can be very beneficial because that's the area that gets very tight when we're fight flight activated. And so that's the area that's going to get really tight if we are trauma triggered, because if we have a moment, that's the area that tightens up. So being able to work with that area can sometimes, and that's why sometimes hip openers are so fucking painful. So, you can do it in a very restorative or yin yoga kind of way with lots of support. And so you're teaching your psoas to relax, but with blocks and stuff, you don't do shit that hurts. But that's why hip openers are sometimes an important trauma-informed practice. One thing that with trauma-informed yoga is we don't cue the breath, because people with trauma histories, there can be a lot tied into people telling you when to breathe in and out for various reasons. So I always tell people, like, notice your breath. If you're holding your breath, like you're working too hard, don't work that hard. That's supposed to be that bad. Pay attention to if it's easier if you're breathing in and out to do certain things. And so trauma survivors also tend to really hold our breaths. And so yoga is a place, yoga is the movement that becomes the practice of the breath, because there's 8 limbs of yoga. And so the movement part is actually a way of testing the breath work part, is how I see it. And somebody's going to get mad and be like, no, that's not it. But that's how I see it. So you should be able to do those things in breathing. So you're actually going to be helping your nervous system as well, just by being able to breathe and move and activate your fascia.
I love that.
I get so excited. I get so excited about stuff like that.
Oh, that's
I'm
so
such
great.
a yoga nerd. Yeah.
My very last question, unless someone jumps in with one more, is somebody asked for a couple of little scripts. How do you tell your dear friend that you're seeing for the first time in over a year that you do or do not want to hug them?
My bestie is lovely about it. He's like, how do you feel about a hug? And I'm like, okay, with my mask on. And I think that, I love that he was hyper aware of that. And so it's okay to say, still being a little feral, and I would love to be able to hug you, but I'm afraid like I'm like my body's too tense for it, and so it won't feel good for either one of us. So I want to. I would say like my nervous system is really jangly right now, and jangly is a word like people can relate to. And it's like, oh yeah, I get that. So elbow bump, and I would just own that that's where you are, and somebody who loves you is gonna respect that. My bestie knows me well enough. He like, can I give you a hug? I have my mask on. I'm like, okay. I'm like, I can do it if I have my mask on. I feel okay. And so I think that should be the norm anyway, is that we should ask people before we touch them. So I think this is a good time to bringing that back, or even just saying like, I am so excited to see you. And my first instinct is like to hug the shit out of your neck because I've missed you so bad, but maybe not yet. And, give people the chance to be like, yeah, I'm going to tap out of that for now. No, maybe after the, like I won't even, like, I don't even want to get oral surgery on my tooth until like our latest number spikes go down again, because like, that's my COVID hole. Yeah. Just like, please, tooth, don't fall out. Like, come on, you've stayed with me for a year. Give me a couple more months. I think we're going to be good in a couple months. So.
Ooh, all right. One final question, which is, this asker is feeling some serious brain fog and has been for quite some time. How do they get themselves out of that fog?
Well, again, nutritionist, I would think that that's neuroinflammation. So that would be the first thing that I would look at is, it would be really, and you. So if this is really like, if you've had a history of depression or those kinds of things in general, that may be more spiky for you right now. And if you're on meds for that, talk to your prescriber about what's helpful. If this is super new for you, first of all, give yourself a fucking break. We're all exhausted. My big thing is like, I'm going to focus on the things that I know I need to remember and not worry about the other shit right now. And so give yourself less to-do list. You asked me earlier, like, do you want to know the questions ahead of time? Like, I know, I really don't. If I don't know the answer to something, I'll just say it, but I don't want to think about them beforehand. So doing more of that, if you need more reminders and lists and shit for yourself, give yourself a break. But if you're not on meds yet and this is new for you, you might do really well, treating like the possible neuroinflammation going on in your body and seeing if you get some respite if you do that before you start taking a bunch of antidepressants. Talk to whoever your doctor is. Like this crazy bitch on YouTube thinks that I should take turmeric. What do you think? And they may say, well, she's a crazy bitch and no, you need to take this instead. And that's fine. But I sort of presume that everybody's super inflamed, and that is like turmeric and green tea and shit and rosemary, like, is not going to hurt anybody to start with.
Awesome. Well, on that note, very appropriately body-centered note, I would like to thank you for joining us, Faith, and I'd like to thank everybody who listened along and who will be listening along into the future. Thanks, the future. I'm excited that the future is actually happening, and this talk has given me some hope. I also see that it's getting dark in Texas. I didn't know that actually happened.
I know, weird. I don't know yes, it is dark. The mosquitoes are out saying, hey girl, hey. It is down to 88.
Oh, chilly.
Cool front, yes. It is going to be dead ass 99 degrees tomorrow. So.
Ooh.
Yeah, and that we were talking about that. I have a bestie date, and our COVID dates have been distanced outside masked things, and so I'm like, well, we ain't fucking going for a walk, I tell you what. So you have to figure out what we're gonna do, because we are not going to the park.
Well, I hope that you have a wonderful weekend and rest of your week, and thank you so much for sharing what you know with all of us. Well, I'm going to go back to editing your next book now.
Whatever one that is, I don't even know either. But I've been very good. I've been working on the friendship research. I'm very proud of me.
I'm so excited to read that. Thank you for writing that book. It's the book we all need right now. All right.
Because we're all feral right now. We don't remember how to do friending. Yeah.
We need some basic tools again. It's so true. Well, thanks again, everybody, and good night. We will, you can find Dr. Faith's books at microcosm.pub, and currently her book, Unfuck Your Body, is funding on Kickstarter for the next week, but you'll be able to get it at microcosm.pub.
And I think also, you're really close to hitting like the next reward level where people can get like a bunch of shit really cheap. That's my great excellent. Like, so if there's other books of mine that you're wanting and you're kind of waiting for a deal, they're going to be like 50% off titles and shit coming up, right?
That's right. That is an excellent sales pitch.
So I'm so good at this. You see, because you're not online. I posted, because you told me, like, post it this morning and then post it again an hour before the event. And I was like, okay. So an hour before we started, I said, my editor said that I need to post this again, but that's really awkward. So I'm going to make it more awkward by pointing out how awkward it is. And I'm reposting my event. Because I'm super cool. Yeah.
It totally, you know, we got here, we all got here. Here we are. And now we're going to go write some more books and eat some turmeric. All right.
Yeah.
Have a good night. Bye, everyone.
Bye.